I'm ready to go.
Are we live yet?
We're live. Okay, we are now live, and all right, we're going to sort of skip the CV over this items pretty quickly. Briefly, the important point to know about the CVAA is that it was passed to bring up American law and regulations to provide better access to people with disabilities who weren't getting it because of changed technology, broadband availability, and public safety needs. There's two titles. One is Title I. It's Communications Access. It covers newer cell phones, specialized VoIP phones, personal computers, laptops and tablets, video conferencing equipment, covered equipment. It covers services such as text messaging, email, instant messaging.
I can hear you. I see the PowerPoint. Let me just get everyone on the same track.
All right.
There's a little bit of a delay.
Okay.
So I'll let you know.
Let me know when to start.
Don't click out of anything.
No. Okay, I'm going to try again. Again, I apologize on behalf of me and my colleagues. We're not sure what did happen. I'm going to fly through some of these slides, the initial slides, and then get into the meat of things. The key of... Pardon?
Can we start from the
Yeah.
beginning?
Yeah.
Is Travis on?
I don't know.
Don't change anything.
No, he's not.
Okay, can we call him? Everyone can hear him.
I need the script. Okay. I'm going to start and cover these initial items quite quickly. The Cvaa was passed in 2010 to bring the nation's laws up to date to provide better protections and access to people with disabilities for advanced communication services. The laws were based on older technology and just didn't keep up with advanced services. They protected voice services, but not services that derived over broadband internet access. The Cvaa regulates both devices and services that ride over internet platforms and these devices. Title I addresses communications access. Covered devices are newer cell phones, specialized VoIP phones, PCs, laptops, and tablets, and video conferencing equipment. Advanced services include text messaging, email, instant messaging, and video communications. In the future, the Internet of Things. I am.
Yep, and then go to, there we go. Okay, and just start from the first slide.
All right. Okay, so what does the Cvaa cover? It covers devices that are used with broadband internet access and services riding those platforms. For example, Title I is communications access. The devices it covers are newer cell phones, specialized VoIP phones, personal computers, laptops and tablets, video conferencing equipment. Advanced services, communication services that it covers include text messaging, email, instant messaging, and video communications. What happens in the future? The Internet of Things? It'd be interesting to find out. Title II addresses video program directly. It affects TVs and other devices that are capable of displaying.
I think you're back on. There. Right there. Perfect.
Video programming. Again, newer cell phones, PCs, laptops, tablets, and programming servers and set-top boxes. And for services, it covers all video program that is shown on TV that is also shown on the Internet. Both titles address emergency access by people with disabilities. Also material is Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that governs sales of services and equipment to the federal government. It requires access by the people with disabilities. So bottom line, if your company provides advanced services or TV programming to end-user customers, it likely has Cvaa obligations. Similarly, if your business manufactures devices that use broadband connections to deliver advanced services to consumers or devices that deliver TV programming over the Internet, it most likely has Cvaa obligations. We'll talk exactly about what that means in a few moments. But first, what about ordinary carriers who just transmit the 1 and 0s? that constitute advanced or video services. Section 2A of the Act exempts entities that only transmit covered services or provide an information location tool. The Act exempts ISPs and operators of broadband platforms that provide web-based access to email and instant messaging. It excludes storage, transmission, or routing functions. For example, a company that merely stores covered messaging services is not itself under the CVAA's obligations. Likewise, a platform that only offers a directory, index, reference, pointer, menu, guide, user interface, or hypertext links that accesses covered services is not covered by the CVAA. This is similar in concept to the rule of law that excludes ISPs from liability for what their subscribers say or publish over the internet. And it's similar to the rules that have governed common carriers for their subscribers' speech. The FCC's test, or what I say is a rule of thumb, is a mere passive conduit does not carry with it CVAA obligations. On the other hand, if an carrier's IP transport services interferes with, blocks, or otherwise negatively affects advanced services, the IP transport is not a passive conduit. It has compliance obligation. If that exists, your company needs to be talking to us. What is a disability? Under the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, it's a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Some types of disabilities are blindness and low vision, deafness and hearing loss, limited movement, speech disabilities, cognitive limitations, or combinations of the above. What is assistive technology? That's a very important concept to understand. It's technology used by people with disabilities to perform functions that might otherwise be difficult or impossible. Assistive technology is a small but established field. It can consist of any type of technical device that helps a person with disability. It can include such simple things as walkers, wheelchairs, hearing aids, and TTY phones. Yet there's much more assistive technology that the average person does not immediately think about. Assistive technology includes all types of hardware, software, and peripherals for the computing device. Tools such as screen readers read text that is shown on screen to users that have visual disabilities. Other assistive technologies are those with visual disabilities to use our screen magnifiers and color contrast devices. Sometimes people with a disability cannot use a standard keyboard or mouse. Assistive technology known as augmented input devices is used for those with mobility or dexterity disabilities. This can include on-screen keyboards or sometimes braille keyboards. Joysticks can help users put information if they have mobility input impairments. There are also other ways to input information through mouth sticks and speech recognition software. You might be aware that your phones have speech recognition with such programs like Siri for the iPhone. Video phones are also a type of assistive technology. They help with the increasing demand of face-to-face communications. Video phones allow users to communicate in a variety of formats, whether through text or audio, to anyone who possesses the same software. Also, and a plus for a person with a mobility disability, it removes the need for movement to a meeting. People can meet anywhere, anytime with a video phone. What are some of the business drivers? And this information comes from our colleagues at Accessibility Partners. They've taken a look at the market. There are 54 million Americans with one or more disabilities. That's about 18% of the U.S. population. We have an aging population that will face more disabilities. There's 27.46 million people 65 and above, and that's expected to grow to over 25%. And of course, there's people with hidden disabilities. And these people with disabilities have $220 billion of discretionary income. And of course, there's brand loyalty by persons with disabilities and their friends or family members. Are you going to buy the products and services that meet your needs, meet the needs of your parents, meet the needs of your spouse, or are you going to buy something that doesn't do it? Spending power aside, it's the law. The CVAA, along with Section 508 and the ADA. And of course, there are business downsides for non-compliance. Decreased market share, competitors will have an advantage, and there's potential for brand damage. The FCC has adopted a number of rules to implement the CVAA. Most of them became effective in 2012. Examples are video description. You need audio narrated description of a television program's key visual elements. There's record-keeping compliance. Entities that are subject to sections 225, 716, or 718 of the Communications Act and the FCC's implementing rules must do record keeping. They must submit record keeping compliance certification and contact information to the FCC annually by April 1st. As a matter of background, Section 225 of the Communications Act covers access to telecommunications services and equipment for service providers and manufacturers. Section 716 covers access to advanced communication services and equipment, the items that we were talking about earlier. And Section 718 covers internet browsers built into telephones used with public mobile services. There are other important items that there's a National Deaf-Blind Equipment Distribution Program that helps low-income individuals gain access to 21st century communication services. There's captioning of internet video programming. There's display of captioning on equipment to use to video programming, which covers smartphones, tablets, personal computers, and set-top box. Effective last October, the FCC adopted regulations for Section 718, which again is access to ACS and equipment, and it's consistent with the rules related to 716, which is internet browsers and mobile phones. The Commission tried to keep the rules as similar as possible so it's easier to comply with. They declined to adopt requirements for or safe harbors with respect to accessibility application program interfaces or APIs. And they retained Section 14.31's record-keeping requirements for manufacturers or service providers subject to 718. Effective in October of last year, covered providers of interconnected text messaging services, including wireless common carriers, must transmit bounce-back messages to senders of 911 emergency texts, SMS, in locations where text to 911 is not available. And that's an important protection because people need to know that their message didn't get through. The Commission has adopted a number of other CVA rules that have taken effect or will take effect after March of 2013. And these include rules related to access to emergency services. Effective this January, set-top boxes for video programming and related services and devices, including devices used to receive or play back digital video, ranging from televisions and computers to tablets and smartphones, must provide on-screen text menus and guides with audible, accessible, and a button, key or icon for activating certain accessibility features such as closed captioning. Non-navigation devices must make their other built-in functions accessible. Finally, there are outreach requirements to inform the public about the availability of these accessibility options and the procedure for making complaints to the FCC. The record-keeping rules need OMB approval to take effect, and that has not taken place yet. Effective next year in May of 2015, emergency information provided within video programming must be accessible to the visually impaired. Certain equipment must be capable of delivering video description and emergency information to those same individuals. And manufacturers of covered video devices, TVs, laptops, tablets, etc., must make available the secondary audio stream which is currently used to provide video description and which will be used to provide oral emergency information. The FCC also reaffirmed and refused to change the obligation of Internet browsers used to provide advanced services also constitute software subject to 716 of the Act and must be accessible by people with disabilities unless doing so is not achievable. I mean, the FCC is going to hold people's feet to the fire. Finally, you should note that the FCC is still considering other CVAA-related issues. There's a petition for reconsideration of the user interfaces order and application of the IP closed captioning rules to video clips, that is, excerpts of full-length programming. Standards are not well established, and several factors are likely to be considered in determining compliance. I mean, this is, since this is a new area of the law and the new rules, there really aren't a lot of hard and fast details available, like, for example, there are for telephones accessible to people with hearing aids. The Act and the rules were intentionally made vague and intended to be developed in a flexible manner to achieve broad access to advanced services and related devices for those of us who have disabilities, a group that increases as the average age of American increases. But we do know that several factors are likely to be considered in determining compliance. These include the needs of people with disabilities, the limits and promises of technology, and the costs for compliance. What is needed? What can be delivered at a reasonable cost? Those are the important questions. Neither Congress nor the FCC decided to force people to retrofit products and services that existed before the rules took effect. But most, if not all, post-2012 products and services are not likely exempt from compliance obligations. If you've been rolling out stuff now and in the last couple of years, you likely have obligations. Let's dig a little deeper. If a service, let's say instant messaging, cannot be used by anyone with visual impairment, your company will likely have a compliance problem. But if instant messaging can be accessed verbally on 2 tablets, 3 smartphones, and 5 laptops that you manufacture, there would be likely less concern when other products manufactured by your company are not accessible to the visually impaired. Perfection is not the enemy of good with respect to CVAA compliance. I would not recommend, however, that a big manufacturer build compliance into only its highest priced devices. There should be some level of compliance and access with low-end devices unless this is simply unaffordable. The same logic applies to service providers that also sell or lease equipment. Service providers should work towards a full accessibility for their offering using a reasonable set of devices as applicable. So if your company sells cell phones, you need a mix. If you can't make them all accessible, all compliant, you need a good mix throughout the range so that people won't have to buy just the most expensive phones to get access. Dialogue with disability interest groups can be useful. Explain your situation and ask for feedback. A company that reaches out to the disabled community is less likely to be viewed as unresponsive, even when accessibility gaps exist for some products or services. We and our network of consultants can help with this outreach. Reasonable, good faith efforts will go much farther than a narrow legalistic reading of the rules. And document, document, document. You need to have good contemporary records of what your company has done to comply with the CVAA. We think that each service or product should have its own story in a CVAA compliance file. Here's what we looked at. Here's what we found. Here's who we talked to. Here's our plan to ensure that future service offerings or products are compliant. Here's who we consulted. Here's what they recommended. And that's just for 2014. To be compliant with record-keeping obligations, a service provider should review its services and products annually. That goes for manufacturers too. Rob's rule of thumb. Imagine the FCC opens an investigation of your company's CVAA compliance. the state attorney general sues your company for violating a state disability law, or a process server has just delivered a class action summons to your registered agent. What do you want to be in your file? What don't you want the other side to see? We can work with you and consultants to develop a CVAA file that protects your company. What happens if you don't comply? What are the risks? The first risk of noncompliance is FCC enforcement. The Commission has statutory authority to impose cash forfeitures and impose greater obligations, such as the duty to caption additional programming. If the rules require you to capture, let's say, 60% to make up a number, they may insist that you agree to caption 80% because you've been non-compliant. CVA violations can result in forfeitures of up to $100,000 per violation, or for each day of a continuing violation, up to a maximum of $1 million, and also orders to bring your products into compliance by date specific. Being the target of an FCC enforcement proceeding is not a pleasant experience, and think of the bad publicity. Your competitors would love to be able to point out that your products and services are not accessible by the many Americans who have a disability. Also note that the Commission has developed a new streamlined complaint process for consumers. It's easy for a disgruntled consumer to file a complaint because he or she cannot send email messages orally. And once a complaint is filed, it will not be ignored if it has merit. A much better approach, in our view, is to work on and achieve reasonable compliance. If that's not doable, it may be possible to obtain a waiver from the FCC. For example, this year the Commission grandfathered for 1 year certain non-compliant e-readers that were designed for text-based digital works, even though they can also provide access to ACS. In the case of the FCC, it's better to ask permission rather than for forgiveness. What about complaints against wholesale providers? The FCC would expect a wholesale provider to provide evidence that its service is a passive conduit. Without good evidence, a complaint could be challenging for defendants. Hence, document, document, document. I don't think the FCC would investigate a wholesale provider without a complaint being filed. I just don't think they've got the resources to do that. Let's look at lawsuits, especially class action lawsuits. It's important to note that the CVAA does not allow for private enforcement. Only the FCC has the statutory authority to enforce the law. But courts have held private parties can bring suits under the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, or state disability law if they prevent private enforcement, and raise CVAA standards. In other words, judges can impose CVA requirements in ADA or state law civil suits. The leading case is National Association of the Deaf versus Netflix. It was a federal case in Massachusetts. It was a suit by a deaf person and an related interest group under the ADA to force Netflix to provide closed captioning with all of its watched instantly programming. The case was settled with Netflix agreeing to close caption all watch instantly programming by September 2014. And as per the consent decree, Netflix also paid attorney's fees and $40,000 for the NAD to monitor compliance. This is just probably the tip of the iceberg. There will be more and more class action lawsuits involving CVA issues. I mean, why do I think this way? I mean, if you watch cable TV, you see the many commercials seeking class action plaintiffs. There's class action websites. It's big business in the United States. What do we think about CVAA litigation risks? Who has higher risks? First, let's talk about providers of covered services and equipment. The obvious conclusion is that larger companies equals more visibility equals more risk. Verizon has more visibility and exposure than a small interconnected VoIP provider. But that small provider can be the target of a small law firm or a sole practitioner. All covered service providers and manufacturers need to make good faith, reasonable compliance efforts in order to reduce risk. Again, document, document, document. Sticking one's head in the ground is not a good idea. The defendant needs a paper trail showing compliance efforts. Further, covered businesses need to establish collaborative relationships with disability groups, either directly or through trade associations. And we can help do this both with the law firm and with our network of consultants. The risk of litigation for wholesale providers should be quite small. But as I said earlier, a wholesale provider needs evidence that it looked at its services and determined they are simply passive conduits. The existence of incorrect statements in the documentation could increase the risk of litigation. We examined our IP transport service. It cannot affect CVA covered services under any conditions. Suppose you have that in a report. But somewhere, somehow, an engineer will find a way that transport services can, under some unique services, interfere with the delivery of adaptive services. Recall the massive SS7 failures of the 1990s that were caused by minor glitches. How does a wholesale provider square its earlier statement with that of the plaintiff's expert engineering witness? The time for review and documentation is now, not when you've been served with the lawsuit. While the risk of direct litigation on CVA claims, ADA or state law based, is quite remote, wholesale providers also need to be aware of being pulled into other companies' lawsuits. A retail service provider faced with a massive class action may well decide to implead its wholesale carrier and claim transport services contributed to the retailer's inability to comply with CVAA accessibility. Litigation allows defendants to try to pass on blame and seek monetary contributions. Rule 14 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure allow defendants to implead those who might be liable to the defendant, and most states have similar rules. Even an innocent wholesale provider might find itself faced with increased legal fees and nuisance settlements. And disability rights groups are more aggressive today. Their members are unwilling to accept second-class citizenship or exclusion from advanced services. It's of critical importance to have some form of direct or indirect relationship with disability organizations. And now, before I turn this over to Travis, I'm going to just talk a little bit about what services we can provide here at Marashley and Donahue. We have a broad network of connections with companies, consultants, engineering firms, nonprofits, disability rights groups, colleges, universities, and the FCC's Disabilities Rights Office, which we can help leverage to provide valuable information and client and compliance services, including evaluation of products and services for CVAA compliance, negotiation consensus building for the establishment of compliance standards, maybe safe harbors if you prefer, cross-sharing of information and identification of cost-effective solutions, the avoidance of overly expensive fixes. You can get compliance review and certification through us with the potential availability of attorney-client and work product privileges to protect confidential information, which is not available if the direct hiring of third-party entities. And given the unsettled state of CVAA compliance, our clients can obtain early mover advantage, which is helping to set the cost-effective compliance requirements as opposed to being governed by other parties' consensus. More information about our compliance network members can be obtained after the execution of a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, with individual group or group members. And that's enough for me. I think it's time to turn it over to Travis Roth and Accessibility Partners. Travis?
Hey, good afternoon, Rob. Can you hear me all right?
Excellent.
All right, excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. And as Rob said, I am Travis Roth with Accessibility Partners. And we just want to tell you a little bit about us and how we can partner with Rob and his team to provide you with coverage for CVAA. Accessibility Partners is headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area. We are an accessibility consulting firm that focuses on accessibility of information and communication technology. And we have subject matter experts in accessibility, including Section 508, which is part of the Rehabilitation Act and covers accessibility by the federal government. the Worldwide Web Consortium, or W3C, Web Context Accessibility Guidelines, and the FCC's 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, or CVAA. Here at Accessibility Partners, we have staff who are also expert users of assistive technology products such as screen readers. Having a diverse staff of people with disabilities gives us a unique insight into the individual experiences of a wide range of technological users. Our clients are in the public and private sectors, from technology companies to telecommunications to education. Moving on to the next slide. Our core service is accessibility testing and auditing of products and services. Some of the types of things we have tested are software and web applications, such as web portals and security tools. Others are hardware, such as laptops, cell phones, and tablets. What is most challenging is some of today's devices, such as cell phones, combine aspects of hardware and software into one package, which brings several accessibility considerations into play at once. Accessibility Partners monitors legislation, guidelines, and standards as they pertain to accessibility both nationally and internationally. This enables us to be current on the accessibility landscape and guide our clients for the immediate and for the future. We understand that sometimes products and services have a long-term horizon for implementation or for expected lifespan, and our clients need to be prepared for keeping surprises to a minimum when possible. Moving on to the next slide. When Accessibility Partners takes on a project, we look to understand what our client actually needs. The testing of products, explaining what we found, and helping to plan for accessibility enhancements where they're needed helps position our clients as leaders in providing accessible products and services. Moving on to the next slide. An accessibility audit can lead to compliance with accessibility law, such as the CVAA. The audit finds how a product or service stacks up with accessibility guidelines. It focuses not only on what is wrong and inaccessible, but also on what is accessible. The finding can serve as a guide for future enhancements, as well as to prepare what the product already does well. So in other words, you want to not only dwell on what's wrong, but hey, what does our product really do well, and so how does it stand out from somebody else's product that maybe doesn't have the same nice accessible feature. In addition, the documentation from an accessibility audit can support the record-keeping requirements of the CVAA. Moving on to the next slide. In an accessibility audit, the focus is on the end user and how he or she interacts with the product. Users may have various disabilities such as blindness, low vision, deaf and hard of hearing, and dexterity impairments. Part of testing a product is to consider what common assistive technology a typical user with a disability would use to gain access. For example, a blind user often uses a screen reader to read text shown on a computer or cell phone screen. Then, how well does the product work with assistive technology currently? What can be changed to allow it to work better? These questions can be answered in the accessibility audit. Moving on to the next slide. Briefly, the testing methodology is: first, review requirements, specifications, and product documentation. Then develop test plan based on requirements such as the CVAA. Test the product by using a combination of automated test tools, assistive technology, and manual inspection of the product, like holding it in your hand, turning it on, turning it off, see what happens. Where possible, we include people with disabilities to ensure real-world feedback. Accessibility Partners employ testers with disabilities, so this is usually the case. A comprehensive report including gap analysis and optionally remediation suggestions is prepared for you. Moving on to the next slide, compliance documentation is also created. For example, For a CVA-based audit, the documentation will list how the product complies to the CVA. Another option is the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, or VPAT, which is used for Section 508. Some of you may have encountered that if you deal with the federal government in their procurement. CVA needs several documents, including statements on accessibility of the product, information about the compatibility of products and services with personal devices, specialized customer premise equipment commonly used by individuals with disabilities to achieve access, which is a fancy way of saying assist technology, like the screen readers and stuff we were talking about earlier, and also efforts to consult with individuals, what you have done to see how your product works or what could be done to work better. Moving on to the next slide, the final documentation package ensures compliance with the FCC's record-keeping rules as part of this VA. As Rob was saying earlier, document, document, document is everything you can have backed up showing that you documented, all the better. An affidavit or declaration is filed annually on or before April 1st stating that the CVA accessibility documentation does exist. So you want to make sure that you have the documentation when you say that you do have it. The annual filing also includes contact information for the consumers and for a U.S. agent for service contact information. Thanks a lot, Rob, and thank you for allowing Accessibility Partners to be part of your presentation. I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Travis. This was very, very interesting and very helpful. As you mentioned, that this is a partnership, a three-way partnership, actually four-way partnership. It's the law firm, it's the consultants, it's the client, and it's the consumers, the people who need access. Jonathan, do we have any questions? Let's see. Let's see. I'm looking here. I'm not seeing any. Come in. Yeah.
Okay. These are the two questions we had.
Oh, okay. Okay. I've got a couple of questions here, and I'll give it a shot and see if Travis has anything to add. The first question is there a safe harbor if you're marketing your product or service for business purposes only and not as a consumer-based product? I think realistically the answer to that is probably no, because there are situations where employees will have disabilities and they are going to need access to them. So Travis, what do you say about that?
I think I would agree with you.
So I mean, it's one of these just very broad things that just you have to expect that just about anything is covered, and be more so as people age. The second one is, how about CVA compliance for interconnected VoIP providers? We are really selling equipment that you do not manufacture. Travis, would you like to take the first shot at that?
Can you repeat that one more time? I missed half of that.
Yeah. How about CVA compliance for interconnected VoIP providers that are reselling equipment that they don't manufacture?
Again, it can depend, but the focus is on the end user and what ends up in the end user's hand and who's responsible. So if you are the one selling the product, and you give it to the end user, then you're ultimately responsible, or you need to go back to your OEM and say, you're giving me an inaccessible product, now give me something that I can sell that's accessible.
Yeah, I think that's it too, because again, the service providers are out there. You're responsible for delivering the services, the access to advanced services and the like, and so you're going to have to work with the manufacturers, and that's another good place where trade associations, I think, can go and handle these. So I agree with Travis. Okay, and this one is for Travis. Do you use the standard VPAT, VAPAT, or what form of documentation do you use to provide 508 conformance?
For the 508, yes, the VPAT, or Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, is what's used, and it's basically a list of the guidelines that the Access Board has put together, and it shows how a product matches or doesn't meet the individual guidelines. The VPAT has been around for, I don't know, 12, 15 years. As far as CVAA goes, there's a bit more to it. There's more documentation as we covered, but the VPAT can be used as part of that, in our opinion, since we're talking about accessibility, and so either a product is accessible or not, it's got to still do the same stuff. It's still got to be able to interact with the user. So in some ways, you can kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. You can do a CVA audit and also end up with Section 508 information.
Okay. And here we have another question. At this point, are there any CVAA requirements for standard desktop phones other than hearing aid compatible? I don't believe there are, because you're not dealing with a screen, you're not dealing with data, you're not dealing with internet. The same would hold for older cell phones too that don't have internet access. You're under the older rules of hearing aid compatible and anything else the FCC has done. Travis, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it, and so far the FCC has been a little bit vague on what specific products should be covered by the CVAA. They haven't came out with a specific list that says laptop yes or laptop no. So it's kind of your best judgment, and if it seems like it's a communication or video device, it's definitely a good place to start.
Any other questions? If not, I think we'll sign off. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. If you come up with further questions, please email them to, oh, got another one. How about documenting testing for compatibility with assistive technology? Travis?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And what we recommend to do there is to test the product with common assistive technology that you kind of expect the user to use. For example, with a laptop, they might use a common screen reader, or if it's a cell phone, they're going to use a hearing aid. Now, the catch is you cannot test it with all assistive technology. I mean, it's just not feasible. There are many different combinations, but you want to give it your best effort, and then we recommend you document and say, hey, we tried it with these assistive technologies that are pretty common, they have the largest market share, and it worked or it didn't work.
Yeah, I think that approach makes very good sense, because again, it'd be impossible to just if you just look at computers alone, you could go back to DOS and the early versions of Windows, and it's probably not realistic to expect any manufacturer or any service provider to be able to go that far back in the past. And so it's, one rule of thumb I've known some people have been talking about is, if the manufacturers are still supporting this product or this software version, that it probably makes sense to try to test it with that. But something that is either very obsolete or sort of cutting edge, not very well accepted yet in the marketplace, I don't think you have to do that. And here's a very challenging question. How do we make sure we are CVAA compliant? I mean, I think there it's a matter of getting in touch with, for example, our firm, and then working with consultants such as Accessibility Partners to but to look at the specifics. I mean, what are we dealing with? Is it a service? Is it a product? Where does it sit in the price product? I know there are some manufacturers of tablets and cell phones that are for maybe the more price-conscious part of the market. It may not be realistic to expect them to be fully compliant, but as I said earlier, you really need to have something across the entire product line. I mean, if you only have high-end products, that's probably going to be a problem. So I think this is very fact-specific. Would you agree, Travis?
Yeah, 100%.
Are there any other questions? If not, again, I want to, on behalf of all of us at Marashlian and Donahue, the CommLaw Group, I'd like to thank you for participating and apologize with our glitch. This program will be recorded and we'll be making it available to review online. And if you have further questions, you can get in contact with us or Travis. I believe his contact material was there and it will be online. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.